So this will be, yeah, so once it's recorded, it will go on to the Shaw YouTube channel afterwards. So people who want to hear it again or are not able to be here, see it afterwards. Okay, so if I could ask everyone to mute themselves. So I think everyone is muted actually, so that should be fine. So over to you, Rabbi Chapper. Thank you very much for joining us.
It's muted, Stephen. Sorry, not everyone. Sylvia's not muted. Ellie, David.
Oh, 1 second. Let me mute everyone. Okay, I will mute everyone and just unmute Rabbi Chapper. 1 second. There we go. Should be able to unmute yourself, Rabbi Chapper.
Thank you.
Yes,
Yes.
you are. Great. Okay.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yes, I was just saying it was very difficult to mute my mother-in-law. But thank you, Stephen, for inviting me. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces, including my in-laws as well. Thank you again for inviting me. I am going on from this to speak at Yavna Primary's Chagigat Siddur, so I've got to be careful I don't give the wrong speech, to give you a speech about the Siddur and not the speech I'm going to give to you this morning. Firstly, lovely to see you all, and thank you for those fillers for Ukraine. And it is just over a week until Purim, and so I thought I was talking about some Yomas, talk a little bit about Purim, but obviously no, the Megillah gives us great hope because we know that we see that everything turns in an instant, in a blink of an eye, things are in the hands of Kodesh Baruch Hu, that even the most dire looking situation can turn around. And we hope, you say, for our brothers and sisters in Ukraine, Hashem should help them and protect them, and peace should be quickly restored. And in the course of that, we shall learn some Torah together. Am I able to share on screen with you?
Yeah, 1 second. I will. Yeah, should be able to do that now.
Thank you. Okay, can everybody see that? Okay, I can make it a little bit larger if you want. Let me just see if I can. Okay, I want to share with you this fascinating halakha in relation to the reading of the Megillah. We want to see the importance of reading the Megillah correctly. Says the Shulchan Aruch in Orach Chaim 696, says the Shulchan Aruch, HaKores Megillah L'Mafreya. If a person was to read the Megillah in the wrong order, for example, Lo Yatsa says the Shulchan Aruch, they will not have fulfilled the mitzvah. For example, Kara Pasuk Echad V'Dilak Hasheni. For example, they read one pasuk and they skip the next one. V'Kara Shlishi, then they read the third one. And then they go back and read the second one. So they've read 1, 3, and then 2 and 4. They've not fulfilled their obligation. Because they have read it in the wrong order. The English translation says incorrectly, but actually it means lemafreya means retroactively. Pasuk echad. They've read one verse out of context. And what should they do if a person accidentally skips? What should they do? They should go back to the verse they forgot, read that one, and then carry on in the correct order. Now, this is a fascinating halakha. This concept, the idea of why you cannot read the Megillah in the wrong order retroactively. The Mishnah Berurah explains, which is the Chofetz Chaim's commentary on the Mishnah on the Shulchan Aruch. He says, "Lemafreya." What does that mean? Hainu shikara pesukim achronim. It means reading later pasukim before reading earlier ones. But he says, and even just reading one verse, a later verse before an early one is also no good. He says, and also he would say similarly, if you were to read chapter 2 before chapter 1, or any of the chapters in the wrong order, you will not have fulfilled your obligation. Now, this is a very unusual halacha because obviously, similarly with Kriyas HaTorah, learning from the Torah, with reading Haftorahs, also, imagine trying to do that in shul, skipping out a pasuk and reading another one and then back to it. People, I'm sure not in Ezra United, but in other shuls, they'll be screaming and shouting at you to make sure you did it correctly. So why does the Shulchan Aruch particularly tell us in relation to the Megillah that you should have to read it in the correct order? And if you do it retroactively, you haven't fulfilled your obligation. Why would we even think about doing it in the wrong order? And why is it so important we don't? And that's really what I wanted to try and drill down to this morning. See the meta halachas, or the idea behind it. we look at a couple more of the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, we've seen on the source number 3, the Biur Halacha says, so a person who reads it out of order has not fulfilled their obligation. Says the Biur Halacha, he goes even further. Not only would you need to go back and read it in the correct order, he would suggest you have to go back and make a new bracha, because it's like somebody who makes a bracha about doing a mitzvah and then gets interrupted and does something else. There's been an interval between the bracha and the mitzvah that invalidates the bracha. You'd have to make a new bracha. So he was saying here, even just reading one verse in the wrong order invalidates the whole reading. You'd have to make a new bracha. And here we're very careful. Safek brachas are kula, we say. We're always very careful not to make a bracha unnecessarily. And yet here, Biur Halacha is telling us it's so important to read it in the right order. If you don't do so, you would have to make a new bracha. The Kaf HaChaim starts to give us a bit of an idea of why this is so important. He says the following: so one who reads the Megillah retroactively in the wrong order has not fulfilled the obligation. Why? Because there's not what's wrong if you read the Megillah in the wrong order. You've not read to remember the miracle as it was. So if you read chapter 9 before chapter 1, you've seen the end. It's like getting a good novel and reading the end before you read the beginning. You've skipped all the way to the end of the story without seeing the denouement, how the story plays out, how the whole situation is set up, and how it plays out. So that's why you've not fulfilled your obligation, because you need to do it in the right way to remember the miracle. And very interestingly, Shulchan Aruch in other places talks about reading the Megillah as pesumi nissa, as publicizing the miracle. I know we're very familiar with that. When it comes to Hanukkah, we place the Chanukias publicly to publicize the miracle. According to Shulchan Aruch, also when it comes to reading the Megillah, that's also a form of pesumi nissa, of publicizing the miracle. It has to be done the right way. How do we know that? Ukasiv, says the Kaf HaChaim, Nizkarim v'na'asim. It says in the Megillah itself, Nizkarim v'na'asim. They remembered and they did. Says the Kaf HaChaim. We make an analogy between remembering and doing. Just as doing, you can't do one day before the other. You can't make the 15th of Adar before the 14th of Adar. So too, reading in the wrong order you can't do. You can't change the order of how things happen. And therefore, just as the doing has to be done in the right order, so to the reading, the remembering of the miracle has to be done in the right order. So that's why if you read the Megillah, even one verse out in the wrong order, you have not fulfilled your obligation. The next time I understand is a bit more on a deeper level. There's a famous Gemara, I'm sure you're all aware of it, a Gemara in Shabbos, 88a. Says the Gemara, picking up on the verse in Shemos, it says, when the Jewish people, think back a few weeks to when we read about the Jewish people standing at Har Sinai, the Torah says, they stood, which means at the foot of the mountain, but here it's translated as at the lowermost part of the mountain. The Gemara picks up on this very unusual word, b'taktis hahar. Amar Reb Avdimi bar Chama bar Chasa. So Rabbi bar Chasa says, "Melamed shekafa kodesh baruch hu es aleihem es hahar kegigis." This verse is actually telling us that they literally stood underneath the mountain. Why? Because God lifted up the mountain, inverted it, overturned it over them like a barrel, v'amar lehem, and said to them, "Im atem mekablim haTorah mutav." If you accept the Torah, all well and good. V'im lav, but if not, shamtei gvura sechem. Here will be your burial place. So that's what it means. They stood literally underneath the mountain. God inverted the mountain over their heads like a barrel, and forced them to accept the Torah. Says the Gemara, well, that's of course is a problem. Amar ba'acha bar Yaakov mikan moda'a Rabbi lo'iraisa. Here, Rabbi would say that we could say that the Jews were coerced into accepting the Torah. If someone was to hold a gun to your head and said, "Accept the Torah," and you say, "Yeah, I accept it," would you say that's a willing acceptance? No. So here, God was holding the Torah over the Jewish people's head and saying, if you don't accept it, you're going to be buried. I'm going to drop the mountain on you. Of course, they accepted it. They said, Nasa v'nishma. But you could argue, well, that was this non-binding because it was forced upon us. And people usually get very excited about this. Well, the mitzvahs are no longer aren't binding because we know that Hashem forces into accepting them. Says the Gemara, Rava answers, Afal Pikein, nevertheless, you're right. Maybe the generation that stood at Sinai were forced into accepting the Torah, and perhaps you could say, therefore, it's not binding on all future generations. But in the times of Achashverosh, the Jews willingly accepted the Torah upon themselves, because it says in the Megillah, Kimu v'kiblu hayuhudim. They established and they accepted. The Jews accepted. Kimu ma shekiblu kuvar. They established that which they'd already taken upon themselves under coercion previously. So since the times of Mordechai and Esther, there's no getting out of it. You can't say, the Torah isn't binding because we were forced into keeping it, because in the times of Mordechai and Esther, the Purim story, we did willingly accept it upon ourselves, and therefore it's binding for all generations. Now, what is the meaning behind this? How can we understand this idea and tie it in with the requirement to read the Megillah in the right order? I wonder if we can, if I just scroll down a second, I'm just going to 1 second, don't look. Okay, I have no artistic talent whatsoever, and therefore, if I was to be asked to draw a mountain, this is how I would draw a mountain. Is that fair? Yeah, if you conceive of a mountain, you generally think of wide base, narrow at the top, that's your mountain, a triangle. Okay, what do we say? What does the Gemara say about what God did with the mountain? He took the mountain and he inverted it. Yeah, is that fair to say that looks like an inverted mountain? If that's our mountain the right way around, there's our inverted mountain. Yeah, okay. You may have seen this already now, but what happens if you put the two together? If you were to overlay the inverted mountain with the upright mountain, has anybody ever noticed that before? Yeah, of course my mother-in-law has. Of course she has. Isn't that a fascinating idea? The very basis of our religion, the very symbol of our religion, which is very hard to trace back, the Magen David, we refer to it as the Star of David. Not many sources, I've looked into it, there's not much sources talking about what relation David HaMelech had to it. Possibly they would have had it on their shields as a symbol of being part of his army. But this has become the recognizable symbol of the Jewish people. One mountain overlaid with an overturned mountain. Now, what's the significance of this? And how does it relate to this idea of the Purim story and not reading things in the wrong order? So I'm going to suggest something I've not seen anywhere else, but I'm going to suggest it to you. Let's look at our mountains. We know, the Torah tells us, can you see where my cursor is here? Can you see that's floating around? So we know that God stood on the top of the mountain. God's presence descended onto the top of the mountain. And he spoke to the Jewish people from there, descending out to the Jewish people. And in fact, this triangular shape, if you think about it, represents the development of Jewish literature from Har Sinai, where we receive the Ten Commandments. Moshe Rabbeinu descends the mountain with the Ten Commandments, including the whole of the Torah. And as we descend from the mountain, both physically, geographically, and historically, what happens? The amount of literature we have develops. Because we know that at Sinai, we were given not only Torah B'Ksav, the written Torah, but also Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law as well, which we now refer to as the Mishnah and the Talmud. And we know that they are voluminous. There's so much material that based on just the Chumash, that as you go further and further away from the source, we get more and more and more literature. Okay? Now, that is the development of Torah, both written and oral. But there comes a point in Jewish history, round about the Middle Ages, where this process starts to change, where the expansion of Torah literature actually starts to distill and be contracted. Round about the 11th century, with the Rambam, Maimonides. Maimonides was the first to codify Jewish law. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of all of Torah, both written and oral, he realized that for most people, that's far too challenging. And therefore, he started to distill it down into what we call psak halacha, into the laws that we live our lives by on a daily basis. And that process of distillation brings us from the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, which was quite voluminous in itself, then to the Arba Turim, the Tur, the forerunner of the Shulchan Aruch, and then to the Shulchan Aruch, and then really where we are today in the days of the poskim, of the halachic decisors. You ask a very specific question about something. For example, can you use Alexa on Shabbos? And you get a very specific answer based on all the volumes of knowledge. So that brings us back to this point here, at the bottom of the triangle. On a daily basis, we need to know exactly what we have to do. Let's take one example. When it comes to reading the Megillah, are you, according to Shulchan Aruch, allowed to read the Megillah lemafreya? One verse, skipping a verse, reading one out of order, and then going back and reading it in the wrong order. Are you allowed to? No, we just saw you can't. Yeah, there's a certain way to read it. There's a correct way to read it. Now, a lot of people ask the question, does God really care whether we read the Megillah in the right order, not in the right order? Does it make any difference to God? Ask the Medrash, does it matter to God whether he shecht an animal at the front of its neck or at the back of its neck? Of course not. But the truth is, there is a really important link between the two. Because if you look, we're here at the bottom of the inverted triangle. And there is, if I was to draw, and I can't do this now, but if I was to draw a vertical line all the way up to the top of the triangle, you see there is a direct connection between Kodesh Baruch Hu, God standing at the top of the mountain, and us here worrying about, are we reading the Megillah in the right order and not in the right order? So it is important how we do things, because that gives us the exact link, direct link back exactly to God. And that is perhaps a deeper understanding of that Gemara, that God inverted the mountain in order to show us, if you can accept the Torah in this way, that's great. That's how I want you to do it. If not, then this will be your burial place. Meaning, you're just missing. If you shift off this point, either 1 degree to the left or to the right, you're not going to make that direct connection. It's a little bit like when you send an email to somebody. Yeah, they've got an email address and it's let's say .com. Now, is it really important whether you put the .com or not? Surely just put the address and com. Will it make a difference if you miss out the dot? An insignificant little dot. Does that make a difference? Of course it does, because it will not reach its destination. Yeah? You could argue how ridiculous. Even a small dot, just a small dot, and doesn't reach its destination. No, we see the significance of a dot. So we see here the significance of a minute halacha can make a huge difference. It will not make its way back to the root of everything, the source of everything, which is God. So that, I think, is a really important understanding of it. A couple of more sources. We've got a couple more minutes left. So it says the Shalah, the Shnei Luchos Bris on this Gemara in Shabbos. I'll say this comment on the verse we just saw. They stood underneath the mountain. The God had threatened that if the Jewish people would not accept the Torah, the mountain would crush them to death. This proved that acceptance of the Torah by the Jewish people at Mount Sinai was an act performed under duress, as we said. Not until after the decree of Haman was cancelled did the Jewish people accept the Torah on an entirely voluntary basis. This is what is meant when the book of Esther describes that the Torah has now become Ora. So we talk about, in Aramaic, we refer to Torah as Oraisa. Midu Oraisa we talk about. Ora is light. That would have previously been a burden, had now become like a ray of light for them. Allusion to this revolutionary change in the Jewish attitude to Torah is found in the words, Va'adas nitna b'Shushan habira, and the law was really given in Shushan, the capital, meaning up until this point, people could claim that Torah was a burden. It was forced upon us. We didn't willingly accept it. It's not something we want. But when the Jews accepted it, kimu v'kiblu haYehudim, we say la Yehudim hayasa ora v'simcha v'sason v'ikar. When they saw the light, literally, they saw light of Torah. They saw that it is something that illuminates their lives. Then there was simcha and sason. Yeah. And that was only something that happened at the time of the Purim story. And I think that's why it's so important that Shulchan Aruch is telling us in a very shorthand way. But the Megillah is telling, the Shulchan Aruch is telling us, the Megillah we know is unique in that Hashem's name is completely absent. it's missing. Even Esther, the heroine, her name refers to Hester Panim. You know, the Gemara says, where do we find Esther in the Torah? From words Hester Panim, I shall hide my face. If you read the Megillah out of order, if you read chapter 9 before chapter 1, you just don't know what's going on. It doesn't make any sense. It's just a random set of coincidences. It does not fit. That is what life's like about as well. That's what halacha is. If you don't get it in the right order, if you don't understand that it all fits into this pattern that leads us back to the source, you're just never going to get it. But once you grasp that, and that's what the Jews at the time of Mordechai and Esther did, it wasn't random that they accepted at that point. They understood, it was as if they'd accepted it brand new at that point. And a couple of final ideas says the Akedah Yitzchak, the argument in the Talmud is turned aside by reference to the Jewish people, talking about the argument that they were forced into accepting the Torah. This argument is turned aside by the Jewish people accepting Torah completely voluntarily at the time of the deliverance from the threat of extinction by Haman. That acceptance is deemed binding for all future generations. That's the bad news. That so-called voluntary acceptance was induced by the realization that if God were to forsake them, their very existence would come to an end, as had been demonstrated by their experience with Haman. The latter had almost succeeded in wiping out a nation that had considered itself both secure and emancipated. So fascinating, what Yitzchak is saying is that this idea of that's not realizing that God is central to our lives, that's what God was saying. If you reject my teachings, then you will die, because the Jewish nation does not survive according to natural law. Our existence and continued existence in the face of persecution is wholly miraculous. You may not see God's hand in it, but it's definitely there. And that is the whole message of the Purim story. And then finally, just a couple of sources. Those who've been doing Daf Yomi will know this Mishnah. The Mishnah says very fascinating. We haven't got time to go into it totally, but another allusion to the idea of a mountain and halakha. The Mishnah says, the idea that a person can make a vow and that vow can be annulled floats in the air. There's nothing really to support it. Meaning, if you look into the Torah for that halacha, you won't find very much to support it. But we have an oral tradition that says that's possible. Hilchos Shabbos. What about all the laws of Shabbos? You know, we could spend all our lives learning Hilchos Shabbos, Chagigas Umilos, and other laws in relation to the festival offerings and misappropriation of temple funds and offerings. These laws, very, very detailed laws of what you can do, what you can't do, they are like a mountain suspended by a hair. There are very few pesukim in the Torah that refer to Shabbos, about not being able to work on Shabbos, but there are many, many halachas. So what the Gemara is saying, so the Mishnah is saying here is that, you know, this mountain is literally hanging by a thread, but it's so critical, that thread, that we dare to deviate one to the other, because if that breaks, then it falls on our head and we are lost. It says Rashi, just finally, Hilchos Shabbos, Hilchos Chagigas Halachos Meilus, Yesh Behen Hilchos Shehein Tlius Beremez Mikra Mu'at. He says Beremez, the idea that all these halachos that we have referred to Shabbos are only alluded to in the Torah. There's no direct reference to the fact that you can't do X, Y, and Z on Shabbos. We have to do A, B, and C on Shabbos. There are only allusions to them in the Torah, and that really brings us back to the Megillah. You know, the Megillah has no mention of Hashem. There's only, you know, the Zohar tells us that when it says HaMelech, that refers to the king, refers to the king of the universe, God himself, but there's no direct reference to God. We have to try and understand it. And that's really the message of why we need to read the Megillah in the right order. Because read it, even one word in the wrong place, you just miss it. You miss the whole message totally. It's a lesson for both in relation to Purim, but for all of our lives as Jews, as we see, the Jews freely and willingly accepted it at Purim time. Happy to take any questions, comments, disagreements.
Thank you very much for that very interesting talk, Rabbi Chapper. Does anyone have any particular questions they want to ask? If you could raise your hands or unmute yourselves, then please feel free to Comments? All quiet. Sylvia and Peter, do you want to ask your son-in-law a question?
So how could we question our son-in-law?
Reverend Climbern's got his hand up, but he's no, he's not entitled to a question.
Okay, Reverend Climate, okay.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. That was, as always, very incisive. But in the spirit of Purim, I'd like to ask whether Borehamwood Library has noticed the disappearance of all those Sforim that are behind you.
But they're not real. That's just it's one. That's like a screensaver. It's not real.
Right, a bit like the shield.
Oh, very
Thank
good.
you.
I do like your Purim costume.
For you, anything, Rabbi.
Okay, if anyone else has any questions, otherwise we'll draw the meeting to a close. Thank you again, Rabbi Chapper, for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you, everyone, and wish you a Purim Sameach.
Happy Purim to everyone, and we'll see you all next Tuesday. I'll notify who the speaker is in a few days. Thank you very much. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.